The shuttle shook violently as it tore through the atmosphere of the unknown moon, and 12 students screamed in terror as metal groaned and warning lights flashed red across every surface of the cabin. "Everyone, hold on!" Professor Kethra shouted, her forearms working desperately at the controls that no longer responded to her commands. And her usually calm voice now carried a note of pure panic that made every student's blood run cold. Zilvex, a slender Thraney with pale blue skin that glowed with bioluminescent patterns, gripped the seat restraint so hard that his thin fingers turned white, and beside him, the massive Keth student named Bramel was making sounds of distress that echoed through the failing vessel. The Galactic Union Academy's field biology class had been on a simple mission, a 3-day excursion to study the plant life of a safe, cataloged world in the outer territories. But something had gone terribly wrong with the navigation corps, and now they were falling toward a moon that appeared on no map and held no promise of rescue. In the back row of seats, a human girl named Mira Chen sat in silence. And while every other student wailed and cried out to their various gods and ancestors, she simply tightened her restraints and watched the chaos with eyes that held no tears. She was 19 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a practical knot and skin that was brown from the sun of her homeworld. And her forward-facing eyes, the eyes of a predator, as her classmates often whispered, tracked every movement in the cabin with unsettling focus. The other students had never quite known what to make of Myra Chun, for she was the only human at the academy, and humans came from a world that the Galactic Union classified as a Class 12 Deathworld, a planet so dangerous that most species could not survive there for even a single day. But Mira was small and soft-looking compared to the armored Keth or the tall and elegant Veloci, and she had no claws or fangs or venom glands or any of the obvious weapons that other dangerous species possessed. So the students had decided that perhaps the Deathworld classification was exaggerated, and they had treated her with a kind of condescending pity that she never seemed to notice or care about. The shuttle hit the ground with a sound like the end of the world, and everything went dark. When Myra opened her eyes again, she found herself hanging upside down in her restraints, and the smell of smoke and burning electronics filled her nose as she quickly assessed her body for injuries, a habit that had been drilled into her since childhood on Earth, where accidents were common and self-reliance was survival. She had bruises forming on her shoulders and a cut on her forehead that bled freely down her face, but nothing was broken. And she reached up with steady hands to release her restraints and drop to what was now the ceiling of the overturned shuttle. Around her, the other students were groaning and crying, some still trapped in their seats and others lying in crumpled heaps among the debris. And Mira moved through the wreckage with quick efficiency, checking each classmate for signs of serious injury. "Is everyone alive?" she called out, and her voice was calm in a way that seemed almost wrong given the circumstances. But that calmness cut through the panic like a blade and made several students stop their crying to look at her. Zilvex pulled himself free from his restraints and stumbled toward her, his bioluminescent skin flickering with distress signals that were hardwired into his species. And he grabbed her arm with trembling hands. "Professor Kethra," he gasped, pointing toward the front of the shuttle where the cockpit had crumpled inward. "She is not moving." Mira pushed past him and climbed over twisted metal to reach their instructor, and what she found made her jaw tighten with concern. The professor was alive, but barely. Her forearms hung limp, and a piece of metal had pierced her lower torso, and the blood that pooled beneath her was the wrong color, too dark, which meant internal damage that Mira could not fix with the limited supplies they had. "She needs medical attention," Mira said. "Real medical attention, not field treatment. So our first priority is activating the emergency beacon and hoping that someone receives the signal." She found the beacon unit in the wreckage and activated it, watching the small light blink to indicate that it was transmitting. But she knew from her training that rescue could take days or even weeks, depending on how far off course they had been thrown. The students gathered in a frightened cluster near the shuttle's torn-open hull, and Mira took her first real look at the world they had crashed on. It was beautiful in a terrible way. Thick forests of dark purple. Vegetation stretched to the horizon under a sky that held 2 small suns and 1 massive gas giant that dominated the view like the eye of an angry god. And the air that flowed in through the shuttle's wounds was cold and carried scents that were completely alien. "Where are we?" Bramall asked, his massive form trembling despite the natural armor that covered his body. And his voice was small and frightened in a way that seemed wrong coming from someone so large. "Unknown moon," Myra answered, checking the shuttle's damaged computer for any data it had managed to record before the crash. "Uncharted, uncatalogued, and probably unexplored. Which means we have no information about what lives here or what dangers we might face." The other students looked at each other with growing horror, and Myra could see the realization spreading through them like a disease. They were alone. They were lost, and nobody was coming to save them anytime soon. "What do we do?" Zilvex asked, and his voice cracked with barely contained terror. "What can we possibly do?" Mira looked at her 11 classmates, soft creatures from soft worlds. Beings who had never known true hardship or danger or hunger, who had grown up in civilizations that had eliminated scarcity and predation so long ago that they had forgotten what it meant to struggle for survival. And then she looked at herself, small, seemingly fragile, with no claws or armor or venom, and she felt something stir in her chest. Something old and powerful that humans had carried with them since the first of their kind had walked the deadly plains of Africa millions of years ago. It was the will to survive, and it was stronger in humans than in any other species the galaxy had ever known. "We survive," Mira said simply, and her voice carried a certainty that made the other students fall silent. "That is what we do. And I am going to make sure that every single one of you lives to see the rescue shuttle. Do you understand me?" They stared at her. This small human girl with blood running down her face and fire burning in her predator eyes. And for the first time since the crash, they felt something other than despair. Night was falling fast, the twin suns sinking below the tree line and the temperature dropping rapidly, and Myra knew that their greatest challenges were only beginning. But she was not afraid. She was human, and humans had faced worse than this and survived. She cracked her knuckles, wiped the blood from her eyes, and walked toward the dark forest alone while her classmates watched in confusion and fear, not yet understanding what she was about to do. They would learn soon enough what it meant to have a Deathworlder on their side. 16 hours had passed since the crash, and the 12 alien students huddled together inside the broken shuttle, their bodies trembling from a sensation that most of them had never experienced before in their entire lives. Hunger. The civilizations of the Galactic Union had eliminated scarcity thousands of years ago, and these students had grown up with nutrient dispensers that provided perfect meals at the touch of a button. So the concept of not having food available was as foreign to them as breathing underwater. But now their dispensers were destroyed. Their emergency rations had been lost in the crash, and their bodies were beginning to demand something that they could not provide. Zilvex sat with his back against the cold metal wall, his bioluminescent skin dim and flickering weakly, and he could feel his strength fading with every passing hour. "I feel strange," he whispered to Bramall, who sat beside him with his armored head hanging low. "My body feels wrong, empty somehow, and I cannot think clearly anymore." "It is called hunger," Bramall replied, and his voice was filled with shame. "I learned about it in history class, but I never thought I would actually experience it myself. And now I understand why our ancestors feared it so much." The other students were in similar states. The Veloci twins were lying still to conserve energy. The small Kethri student had not spoken in hours, and Professor Kethra remained unconscious in the corner where they had moved her, still alive, but growing weaker. And Mira-chan was nowhere to be seen. She had walked into the forest as night fell, carrying nothing but determination, and she had not returned. And some of the students had begun to whisper that perhaps she had abandoned them, or perhaps something in the forest had killed her. Should we search for her? One of the Veloci twins asked weakly, but nobody moved because nobody had the strength or the courage to venture into the dark alien wilderness. Another hour passed, and then another, and the students began to lose hope. Then they heard footsteps approaching, heavy footsteps, the footsteps of someone carrying something large, and every student turned toward the torn opening of the shuttle with fear in their eyes. Mira-chan emerged from the darkness, and what the students saw made them gasp in shock and horror. She was covered in blood. Not her own blood, at least not most of it, but the dark purple blood of something else, something that she was carrying over her shoulder, like it weighed nothing at all. It was a creature, dead and limp, with 6 legs and a body covered in rough scales. And it was about the size of a large dog from Earth. And its neck was bent at an unnatural angle that told a clear story of how it had died. Mira dropped the carcass on the floor of the shuttle with a heavy thump, and she stood there breathing hard but steady, her predator eyes scanning the faces of her classmates. "What have you done?" Zilvex whispered, his voice filled with horror as he stared at the dead creature. "What is this? What have you done?" "Dinner," Mira said simply, and she reached down to her belt where she had tucked a stone, but not just any stone. A stone that had been carefully shaped into a sharp edge. A tool that she had made herself using techniques that humans had developed millions of years ago. The students watched in stunned silence as Myra began to work on the creature, using her stone tool to cut through the tough hide and remove the parts that could not be eaten. "You killed it," Bremel said, and his voice was barely a whisper. "You actually killed a living creature with your own hands." "Yes," Myra replied without looking up, her hands moving with practiced efficiency that spoke of training and experience. "That is how you get food when there are no dispensers or farms or stores. You hunt." "But how?" Zilvex asked, his scientific curiosity briefly overcoming his horror. "You have no weapons, no claws, no venom. How did you possibly kill something like that?" Myra paused in her work and looked at him, and there was something in her eyes that made him want to look away, but he could not. "I chased it," she said. "I found its tracks near a water source. And I followed it, and when it ran, I ran after it. And when it got tired and slowed down, I kept running. And I chased it for almost 2 hours until its heart gave out from exhaustion and it collapsed. And then I broke its neck." The students stared at her in disbelief. "That is impossible," one of the Veloci twins said. "No creature can run for 2 hours straight. The body would overheat and fail." "Human bodies do not overheat easily," Myra explained, returning to her work. "We sweat, which means liquid comes out of our skin and evaporates and cools us down. And we can run for hours and hours without stopping. And most prey animals cannot do this. So eventually, they collapse and we catch them. This is called persistence hunting. And humans have been doing it for millions of years." She finished preparing the meat and then gathered dry materials from the wreckage. Pieces of fabric, broken wood, anything that would burn. "What are you doing now?" Zilvex asked. "Making fire," Myra said, and she picked up 2 pieces of wood and began to rub them together with intense focus, her hands moving rapidly back and forth. And the students watched in confusion because they could not understand what she was trying to accomplish. Then smoke began to rise from the wood, and then a tiny spark appeared. And then Myra leaned down and blew gently on the spark, and suddenly there was flame. "How did you do that?" Bremel gasped. "You made fire from nothing, with just your hands." Friction creates heat, Myra explained, feeding the small flame with more dry material until it grew into a proper fire. And heat creates fire. It is basic physics. And humans learned this trick so long ago that we do not even remember a time before we knew it. The students gathered around the fire, drawn by its warmth in the cold night, and they watched as Mira placed the meat over the flames and began to cook it. The smell that filled the shuttle was strange and frightening and wonderful all at once. "You expect us to eat that?" one of the Kethri students asked, her voice trembling. "You expect us to eat the body of a dead animal?" Mira looked at her with eyes that were not unkind, but were absolutely serious. "I expect you to survive," she said. "And this is how you survive when there is no other food. You eat what you can find. And right now, this meat is the only thing that will keep you alive until rescue comes. So yes, I expect you to eat it." The students looked at each other, their cultural horror battling against the desperate hunger that was clawing at their insides. Zilvex was the first to reach out and take a piece of the cooked meat, his hand shaking as he brought it to his mouth, and he closed his eyes and bit down. It was the most delicious thing he had ever tasted. One by one, the other students followed his example, and soon they were all eating, and the shuttle was filled with the sounds of chewing and sighs of relief as their starving bodies finally received the nourishment they needed. Mira watched them eat, making sure that everyone got their share, and she allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. They would survive this night, but she knew that harder challenges were coming, and she would need to be ready for whatever this alien moon would throw at them. She looked out at the dark forest and wondered what else was out there, watching and waiting, and she made a silent promise to herself. Whatever came for her classmates would have to go through her first. 3 days had passed since the crash, and the students of the Galactic Union Academy had begun to settle into a strange new routine built around survival. Every morning, Mira would leave the camp before the twin suns rose, and she would return hours later with food, sometimes the 6-legged creatures she called runners, sometimes strange bird-like things that she caught in traps she had built, and once a large fish-like animal from a nearby stream. The alien students had stopped questioning where the food came from, and they had stopped feeling horror when they saw the blood on Myra's hands, because hunger had taught them lessons that their comfortable civilizations had let them forget. Survival was not pretty, but it was necessary. On the third night, everything changed. Zilvex was sitting by the fire, his bioluminescent skin finally glowing with healthy patterns, again thanks to the nutrition Mira had provided, when he noticed something strange in the darkness beyond the camp. Eyes, multiple pairs of eyes, glowing with a faint red light, watching them from the shadows of the forest. "Myra," he whispered, his voice tight with fear. "There is something out there." Mira was at his side in an instant, her own predator eyes scanning the darkness with an intensity that made the watching creatures seem less frightening by comparison. "I see them," she said quietly. 6 of them, maybe 7, and they have been circling the camp for the last hour. I was hoping they would move on, but it seems they have decided we are worth investigating." "What are they?" Bramall asked, his massive armored body trembling despite his natural protection. "Predators," Mira answered, and her voice was calm but serious. "Apex predators by the look of them. They are built for hunting and killing, and they have been watching us to find our weaknesses." As if responding to her words, one of the creatures stepped forward into the light of the fire, and every student gasped in terror. It was a nightmare made flesh, the size of a large wolf from Earth, with no eyes but dozens of small holes covering its face that Mira recognized as thermal sensors. And its body was covered in dark armor plates, and its mouth was filled with teeth that were clearly designed for one purpose only. "Nobody move," Mira commanded, her voice cutting through the rising panic. "And nobody run. Do you understand me? nobody run." "Why not?" one of the Veloci twins cried, every instinct screaming at her to flee. "Because running triggers the chase instinct," Myra explained. "And once you run, you become prey. And prey gets killed. I know this because humans have the same instinct. And I am telling you that if you run, they will catch you." The creatures were closing in now, 6 of them forming a half circle around the camp, their armored bodies moving with terrible grace. And their thermal sensors were pointed directly at the warm bodies of the students. "What do we do?" Zilvex asked, his voice breaking with fear. Myra reached down and picked up 2 things she had prepared earlier, a long stick she had sharpened into a spear, and a heavy rock that fit perfectly in her hand, and she stood up straight and faced the predators. "You stay by the fire," she said. "The fire confuses their thermal sensors and makes you harder to target. I'm going to make them leave." "How?" Bramble demanded. "How can you possibly fight those things?" Mira looked back at him, and in the firelight, her face had transformed into something that the alien students did not recognize, something ancient and savage, and utterly without fear. "I am going to show them that we are not prey," she said. "I am going to show them that hunting us is a mistake." And then she screamed. It was not a scream of fear or pain. It was a war cry, a sound that humans have been making since the dawn of their species, a sound designed to terrify enemies and give strength to allies. And it tore through the night like a physical force. The alien students covered their auditory organs in shock. But the effect on the predators was even more dramatic. They actually flinched back, confused by this strange small creature that was making threatening sounds instead of running away. Myra did not give them time to recover. She charged at the nearest predator, her spear raised high, and she drove the sharpened point into the gap between its armor plates with all her strength. The creature shrieked in pain and anger and turned to bite her. But Myra had already moved, rolling to the side and coming up with her rock in hand. And she smashed it against the creature's head with a blow that cracked armor and sent it stumbling. The other predators attacked. What followed was a battle that the alien students would remember for the rest of their lives. A single human girl against 6 armored killing machines, armed with nothing but a stick and a rock and the savage determination that had made humans the dominant species of the most dangerous planet in the known galaxy. Mira took wounds, terrible wounds that made the students cry out in horror. Claws raking across her back, teeth tearing into her arm, impacts that should have broken bones and left her helpless on the ground. But she did not stop. Every time she was knocked down, she got back up. Every time she was hurt, she fought harder. She killed one predator with her spear through its throat, and she killed another by crushing its skull with her rock. And she drove her sharpened stick into the eye holes of a third until it collapsed and stopped moving. The remaining 3 predators looked at their dead packmates, and they looked at this impossible creature that refused to die, and something changed in their behavior. They were afraid. Predators understood strength, and they understood danger. And this small furless thing had proven itself to be more dangerous than anything they had ever hunted. They turned and fled into the darkness, leaving behind their dead and the strange creature that had killed them. Mira stood in the middle of the carnage, breathing hard, covered in blood both purple and red, and she watched the survivors disappear into the forest. Then she turned and walked back to the fire and sat down heavily. "Myra!" Zilvex rushed to her side, his hands hovering helplessly over her wounds. "You are hurt. You are badly hurt. We need to do something." "I am fine," Myra said, and her voice was tired but calm. "I need to clean the wounds and stitch them closed, but nothing vital was damaged. Humans are hard to kill." She reached into a pouch she had made and pulled out a needle carved from bone and thread made from plant fibers. And as the alien students watched in horrified fascination, she began to sew her own wounds closed with steady hands. "Does that not hurt?" Bramall asked, his voice small and awed. Of course it hurts, Myra replied, not pausing in her work. It hurts very much, but pain is just information. And I can choose to acknowledge the information without letting it control my actions. And right now, fixing these wounds is more important than feeling the pain of fixing them. She finished her work and leaned back against a piece of wreckage, exhaustion finally showing on her face. Get some sleep, she told them. The predators will not return tonight. They have learned that this camp is not worth the cost. The students looked at her with eyes that held something new. Not the pity they had felt before the crash, not the confusion they had felt when she first hunted for them, but something deeper and more powerful. Respect, and maybe even love. This strange small creature from a deadly world had fought and bled for them, had protected them when they could not protect themselves, and she had asked for nothing in return. Zilvex sat down beside her and gently placed a blanket over her shoulders. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for saving us. Mira smiled weakly and closed her eyes. That is what humans do, she murmured as sleep took her. We protect our people. A week had passed since the crash, and the survivors had transformed from frightened victims into something that almost resembled a functioning community. This transformation was entirely because of Mira-chan. The camp around the crash shuttle had grown and changed under her guidance. There were now water containers made from large leaves that Mira had woven together. Racks for drying meat that would last for days. Traps set around the perimeter to catch small animals and warn against larger ones. And a system of shelters built from branches and shuttle debris that kept everyone warm at night. The alien students had started to help with the work, following Myra's instructions as she taught them skills that their species had abandoned countless generations ago. Zilvex had become surprisingly good at weaving, his long thin fingers perfect for the delicate work, and Bramall used his great strength to move heavy materials and dig storage pits. Even the Veloci twins had found a role, their keen eyesight making them excellent lookouts who could spot danger long before it reached the camp. But as the days passed and survival became less desperate, the alien students began to ask questions. Questions about the strange creature who had saved their lives. Questions about what humans really were. One evening, as they sat around the fire, eating the meal Myra had provided, Zilvex finally asked the question that had been burning in his mind. Myra, I have been thinking about everything you have done since we crashed. I do not understand how it is possible. You are smaller than most of us. You have no natural weapons. Your skin is soft and easily damaged. Yet you have done things that none of us could do, even if we wanted to. How is this possible? What are humans really? Mira was quiet for a moment, poking at the fire with a stick, and when she spoke, her voice was thoughtful. That is a big question, she said, and I'm not sure I can answer it completely, but I can try to explain. She looked up at the sky, where the massive gas giant hung like a painted eye. Humans evolved on a planet called Earth, and Earth is what the Galactic Union calls a Class 12 Deathworld. Do you know what that means? I know the classification system, Bramall said. Class 12 is the most dangerous rating, reserved for planets where intelligent life should not be able to develop because the conditions are too hostile. That is correct, Myra said, and yet humans developed anyway, because that is what we do. We survive things that should kill us. She held up her hand, showing them her fingers. These hands evolved to make and use tools, because on Earth, we needed tools to survive. We could not outrun the fastest predators, so we made weapons to kill them. We could not survive the cold, so we made fire and clothes. We could not digest most foods safely, so we learned to cook them. But your endurance, Zilvex said, the way you can run for hours without stopping, the way you can keep fighting even when you are injured. How do you explain that? Humans are persistent predators, Myra explained. On Earth, we hunted by chasing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. We cannot run faster than most animals, but we can run longer than almost anything, because our bodies are designed to shed heat through sweating and to store energy for extended effort. She touched the wounds on her arm, which were healing but still visible. And we are hard to kill because we evolved in a world that was always trying to kill us. Our immune systems fight off infections that would kill other species. Our blood clots quickly to prevent us from bleeding out. Our bones can heal from breaks that would permanently cripple others. And our pain tolerance is high because our ancestors needed to keep fighting even when they were hurt. That is terrifying, one of the Veloci twins whispered. Maybe, Myra admitted, but it is also why humans are still alive. Earth threw everything it had at us, and we refused to die. And eventually, we got strong enough to start fighting back. She smiled, and there was pride in her expression. We danged fire, we built shelters, we domesticated animals and plants. We invented medicine and technology, and we spread across our entire planet even though every part of it was dangerous in different ways. We lived in frozen wastelands where the cold could kill in minutes. We lived in burning deserts where the heat could cook us alive. We lived in jungles filled with venomous creatures and diseases, and we survived it all. And then you went to space, Zilvex said, his voice filled with wonder. Yes, Myra laughed. We conquered our Deathworld. And then we got bored and looked up at the stars and thought, why not conquer those too? Bramble shook his massive head slowly. I thought I understood what humans were, he said. But I was wrong. I thought you were fragile because you looked fragile. And I thought you were weak because you had no natural weapons. But now I see that I was completely mistaken. You are not weapons, Zilvex added. You are something more dangerous. You are survivors. You are adapters. You are creatures who look at impossible situations and find ways to win anyway. Mira shrugged modestly. We are just doing what humans have always done. She said, we see a problem, and we solve it. We see a challenge, and we overcome it. We see death coming for us, and we punch it in the face and keep walking. The students laughed at that, and it was a good sound. The sound of people who had been through terrible things together and had come out the other side stronger. But Zilvex was not finished with his questions. There is something else I have noticed, he said. Something that confuses me even more than your physical abilities. You have been working without rest for a week. You have given us the best portions of food while eating little yourself. You have put yourself in danger again and again to protect us. And you have never once complained or asked for anything in return. Why do you do this? Why do you sacrifice so much for people who are not even your own species? Mira was quiet for a long moment, and when she answered, her voice was soft. Because you needed help, she said simply, and I could provide it. But we are strangers, Zilvex pressed. Before this crash, we barely spoke to you. Some of us even looked down on you, and yet you have treated us like family. That is another human trait, Myra said. We form bonds with others, even others who are different from us. And once we consider someone part of our group, we will do anything to protect them. This is how humans survived when we were weak, by working together and protecting each other. She looked around at the faces lit by firelight. When this crash happened, you stopped being strangers and became my responsibility. You became my people. And humans do not abandon their people, no matter the cost. Zilvex felt something warm spreading through his chest, an emotion that his species experienced rarely but treasured deeply. Gratitude. And beneath that, something even more precious. Friendship. Myra, he said, his bioluminescent skin glowing with emotion. I want you to know that whatever happens, whether rescue comes tomorrow or never comes at all, I am glad that I crashed on this moon with you. You have taught me more about courage and compassion in 1 week than I learned in 20 years at the academy. Mira smiled, and for a moment, she did not look like a dangerous predator or a tireless survivor. She looked like a young woman who was far from home and doing her best. "Thank you, Zilvex," she said. "That means a lot to me." The fire crackled between them, and the stars wheeled overhead. And for that one perfect moment, everything was peaceful. But somewhere in the forest, the emergency beacon continued to blink its signal into the void. And somewhere far away, that signal was finally being received. On the 12th day since the crash, Myra was sharpening her spear by the fire when she heard a sound that made her freeze. It was a sound she had almost stopped hoping to hear, the deep rumble of shuttle engines descending through the atmosphere. "Everyone wake up," she shouted, jumping to her feet. "There is a ship coming. Rescue is here." The camp erupted into chaos as the alien students scrambled out of their shelters. Their eyes turned toward the sky where a Galactic Union rescue shuttle was breaking through the clouds and descending toward them. Zilvex grabbed Myra's arm, his bioluminescent skin blazing with joy. "They found us," he cried. "They actually found us." The shuttle landed in the clearing near the crashed vessel, and its doors opened to reveal a rescue team of 6 Galactic Union officers led by a towering Veluxi commander with gray scales and battle scars across his face. Commander Dexter had been searching for the missing Academy students for almost 2 weeks, and he had expected to find bodies. What he found instead made him stop in his tracks. 12 students, all alive, standing in front of what could only be described as a fully functional survival camp. There were shelters and water storage and food, racks and a defensive perimeter and a fire pit, and a dozen other signs of intelligent, organized survival. "By the ancient stars," he whispered, "how is this possible?" His team spread out through the camp, marveling at everything they saw: the tools made from stone and bone, the traps for catching prey, the medical area where Professor Kethra lay recovering from her injuries, thanks to Mira's constant care. "Commander," one of his officers called out, "you need to see this." Dexter walked to the edge of the camp where his officer was standing, and he looked down at what had been left there. 3 dead predators. Creatures he recognized as Vareth Night Hunters. Apex killing machines that had been known to slaughter entire exploration teams. "What happened here?" he demanded, turning to the students. Zilvex stepped forward, his thin body straight and proud. "She happened," he said, pointing at Myra. "The human girl, she did all of this. She hunted for us when we were starving. She built this camp when we had nothing. She fought those creatures alone when they attacked us. And she saved every single one of our lives." Commander Dexter looked at the human. She was smaller than any of the other students, and she was covered in scars both old and new. And she was holding a primitive spear like it was the most natural thing in the world. And her forward-facing eyes met his gaze without flinching. "You did all this?" he asked, his voice heavy with disbelief. Myra shrugged. "I did what needed to be done," she said simply. "She ran down prey until their hearts stopped," Bramall added. "She made fire with her bare hands. She sewed her own wounds closed after fighting 3 predators at once. She went without sleep for days to stand guard over us, and she never once complained. She taught us to survive," one of the Veloci twins said. "She taught us things our species forgot 10,000 years ago, and she did it with patience and kindness even when we were useless and afraid. She treated her own wounds with no pain medicine," another student added. "She ate less than anyone so we could have more. She put herself in danger over and over again so we could be safe." Commander Dexter listened to the students speak, one after another, each of them adding to the picture of what had happened on this moon. And as he listened, he began to understand something that would change his view of humans forever. He had always known that humans were classified as Deathworlders. He had always known the theoretical facts about their homeworld and their evolution. But he had never truly understood what those facts meant until now. "The Academy taught us that humans were primitive compared to most Union species," Zilvex said. and his voice was thick with emotion. They taught us that humans were newcomers to space, that your technology was crude and your culture was young, and some of us looked down on humans because of this. He turned to Mira, and his eyes were bright with tears. We were fools, he said, because while we were learning to use machines and taking everything for granted, humans were learning to survive against impossible odds. And that is worth more than any technology ever invented. Mira looked uncomfortable with all the attention. It really was not that impressive, she said. Any human could have done what I did. This is just basic survival training that we learn as children on Earth. Basic survival training, Commander Dixer repeated slowly. You fought apex predators with a stick and a rock, and you call that basic? Well, Myra admitted, maybe a little more than basic, but still nothing special. I just did what humans have always done, which is refuse to give up. The commander shook his head in amazement. I have served in the Galactic Union military for 40 years, he said, and I have never seen anything like this. I have never seen one individual do so much for so many with so little. And I want you to know that when my report reaches the Union Council, everyone will know the name Mira Chun. Myra finally smiled, a real smile that made her look young and happy. I do not need recognition, she said. I am just glad everyone is alive and going home. The evacuation began quickly. The students were loaded onto the shuttle. Professor Kethra was placed in a medical pod for proper treatment, and the camp that had kept them alive for 12 days was left behind. But before the shuttle doors closed, Zilvex looked back at the camp one last time. He would never forget this place. He would never forget what it had taught him about courage and sacrifice and the incredible potential that lived inside the strange species called humanity. 6 months later, Zilvex stood in the Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Union, watching as Commander Dexter presented his report to the Council. The hall was packed with representatives from 100 different species, all listening to the story of 12 students who had survived against impossible odds. And at the center of the story was Mira Chun. The images that Commander Dexter showed were shocking to the assembled delegates. Images of the camp, of the dead predators, of the tools and shelters that one human had built to save lives. But the most powerful part of the presentation was not the images. It was the testimony of the students themselves, each of them speaking about what Myra had done and what it had meant to them. When the presentation ended, there was silence in the Great Hall. And then, starting slowly but building like thunder, there was applause. Within a year, everything had changed. The Galactic Union created a new training program for Academy students, focused on survival skills that had been forgotten by most species. And the program was led by human instructors who taught the techniques that had been passed down on Earth for millions of years. Mara Chen became the first human to receive the Union Medal of Honor, the highest award for service and sacrifice, and her story was taught in schools across the galaxy. But more importantly, the way the Union thought about humans began to shift. They were no longer seen as primitive newcomers or dangerous Deathworlders to be watched with suspicion. They were seen as what they truly were: survivors, protectors, beings who would fight against any odds to save those they cared about. A new saying began to spread through the academies and military barracks of the Union, a saying that captured what everyone had learned from the story of Myra Chun. If you are ever lost in the dark, pray you have a human with you. They were born in the dark, and they learned to hunt in it. And somewhere on Earth, in a small house in a small town, Mira Chun sat with her family and smiled. She had not done anything special. She had just done what humans had always done. She had survived. And she had made sure that everyone around her survived too. That was what it meant to be human. That was what it had always meant. And as the stars wheeled overhead and the universe continued its ancient dance, humanity continued to do what it did best, facing the darkness with courage, protecting the weak with strength, and never, ever giving up. Because that was what humans were. They were the children of a death world. They were the survivors of impossible odds. They were the light in the darkness. And they would never stop fighting for those they loved.